Welcome to the Great Lakes steamship William G. Mather. This century-old vessel was once the flagship of the Cleveland Cliffs Iron Company. During its 55-year career, it broke tonnage records and was the first U.S. ship certified with an automated boiler. Since 1991, this floating museum has been a staple of Cleveland's lakefront and is nicknamed the ship that built Cleveland. In this video, we'll take a look at its impressive history and go on a tour from stem to stern. Let's go climb aboard. Originally founded in 1847, the Cleveland Cliffs Iron Company was the undisputed leader in the iron, steel, and shipping industries during most of the 20th century. In fact, the company is still around today, albeit no longer owning a ship fleet. Built in 1925, the William G. Mather was the third of four similar boats constructed by the Great Lakes Engineering Works. Interestingly, Cleveland Cliffs already owned another boat with that name that had been launched in 1905. The ship was later renamed J.H. Cheadle. Ironically, Cliffs also owned another vessel with that exact same name too. Both Mathers were of course named after prominent Clevelander William Gwynn Mather.
He was the first president of the Cleveland Cliffs Iron Company, and he was the son of the founder, Samuel Mather. He was an industrialist, he was a philanthropist, he was a really influential figure in Cleveland. And he, not only did he run the Cleveland Cliffs Company, he was also the president of the art museum for a while. His wife founded the botanical gardens. So he kind of represents sort of the intersection of the industry of Cleveland and the arts sector, because all the money that he was getting from the industry, he was funneling that back into the arts.
Launched at River Rouge, Michigan on May 23, 1925, the Mather was one of the Great Lakes' largest ships in carrying capacity. Measuring 618 feet long, it has a beam of 62 feet, a depth of 32 feet, and a gross tonnage of 8,662 tons.
The main thing that the Mather was doing was carrying iron ore from up in Duluth, Minnesota, Superior, Wisconsin, the iron mines up there. Cleveland Cliffs owned iron mines in the northern part of the United States. And so the Mather would take 14,000 tons of iron ore, bring that back for the steel mills, and then they would pick up another cargo in the Lake Erie area, something like coal or grain, and then bring that up to Minnesota and Wisconsin, so that they always had a cargo going. And they would take that trip about 30 times a year, just bringing thousands of tons of iron ore back. So that was the main thing that they did. There was one time that they carried cars early on in their career, and they carried guests, but the guests always had to be riding during a normal trip. So the nickname, the ship that built Cleveland, comes from what it was doing, where if you tallied up all the tons of cargo that it carried, it could have supplied all of the iron ore to build all the skyscrapers in the Cleveland area. It wasn't the only ship supplying that, but if you just amassed everything, so that's why it got that nickname.
Being the flagship of the Cleveland Cliffs, it received the latest technological advancements. It also boasted some of the finest crew and passenger accommodations of any freighter on the lakes.
This is dunnage, so this is where the unlicensed crew stayed. And unlicensed crew are people like deckhands who were just signed on, didn't have any experience, and they were told, paint that, move that thing, take that clamp, that sort of thing. This area was right next to Cargo Hold 1, and it was right next to the electric gyroscopic compass. It was right above the bow thruster. So it was loud and hot, and so it was a physical encouragement for them to get a license, to take classes and work their way up the ranks. Despite being not the best living quarters, it's still pretty open, and they still had 2 bunk beds. They had running water, electricity, and heat, which was really, really nice, because in 1925, not all houses had all 3. So this area, even though it is the lower end of the hierarchy, they still were treated very, very well. They also had air conditioning. This is a wind scoop. So you would put this in a porthole and redirect it so air would get funneled into your room. The power of technology is staggering. This is the forward cruise hall. This is where the licensed crew stayed. So we have the third mate right here. We have some wheelsmen. We have some watchmen. We have people who were working their way up the ranks. They had running water, electricity, and heat, just like in dunnage. They also had a head. They had books, they had games, they had things that they used to pass the time during their 8 hours off around the clock. They also had the windlass room right here, where the anchor windlasses were housed for the forward end of the ship. There's 2 anchor windlasses in here, one for the port side anchor, one for the starboard side anchor. And they also have a mooring winch in this room as well. And this also has access to the chain locker, where the anchor chains were stored.
Ascending the bow deck houses, we next come across its opulent guest and officers' quarters.
This is the lower guest lounge. So this is one of the places where guests would stay. Guests were people that Cleveland Cliffs wanted to either impress, discuss business with, or reward for service. So the Mather could carry 12 guests when it was a flagship, and then at some point it was demoted as flagship and they could only carry 10 guests. When the Mather became a museum, they restored this to represent 1925, because in 1967 they remodeled this area and covered up the black walnut paneling with 1967 era paneling, which it was a different style, but this was restored to the original black walnut. The fireplace is not original. They did have an electric fireplace. That fireplace is from a sister ship called the Kinsman Enterprise that was ultimately scrapped, and the fireplace was salvaged for the museum. Another really cool thing about this room is we have the original bottle from 1925. The Mather was christened in 1925 when it was launched. It was christened by Claire Schneider. She was the daughter of A.E.R. Schneider, who was the guy in charge of all the boats at the Cleveland Cliffs Iron Company. Mather himself didn't have any daughters, so Claire Schneider was chosen to christen the boat. So guests had very nice rooms. They were waited on hand and foot. They had a porter. There's a kitchenette upstairs. And they could play games and read. They had a writing desk. So guest life was very, very nice on the Mather. This is the upper lounge. So this is where guests spent most of their time. There's some other guest quarters connected to the upper lounge, and it retains its original 1967 remodeling look. So we have this beautiful paneling. But we have a photo album right here that shows what this area looked like in 1925 before they remodeled it to be more modern. But they had books, they had games, they had radio, they had TV when TV became a thing. Another thing that you can notice in the rooms up here is how the architecture of the boat is constructed, and that is that it's sort of bent at the top. All right, here's the captain's office. Connected to this is the captain's quarters. He had a day bed as well as a double bed. And he also had all sorts of amenities. He has 2 phones. This is radio. This one is to call different rooms on the ship. This room was restored to represent 1925, just like the lower lounge. And when they were doing that restoration work, they uncovered a key cabinet. And one of the keys in that cabinet is a joke that they put in when they were setting it up. So whenever I do a tour, I always ask people to see if they can figure out which one is the fake key. And sometimes they can't figure it out. It's number 42. Another fun thing is this closet. Captain had a safe. And in his safe, they would store medicine and the firearm of the ship and important documents and things like that. When the boat became a museum, the story goes that a locksmith came aboard to check out the safe and see if he could unlock it, but he couldn't figure out the combination, and in desperation he looks above and notices something above the door, and lo and behold, that was the combination above the door. The captains changed every season, and so they would give the next captain the combination, but they kept losing the combination, so they just wrote it above the door. And the next stop is the pilot house. This is the pilot house, so this is the navigation center of the ship. We have the ship's wheel right here, and the wheelsman was in charge of steering the wheel. He had to turn wherever he was told to turn, and he stayed at the wheel for his whole shift. He also had to ring the bell, so he rang the bell every half hour to mark the time. Shifts were 4 hours on, 8 hours off. So when he rang the bell once, that was half an hour. Rang the bell twice, that was 1 hour. And he also had a few compasses and navigation equipment of his own. He had the binnacle, which housed the magnetic compass, and in the magnetic compass, in the binnacle is the magnetic compass, and the magnetic compass, of course, points to magnetic north. Next to him, on the port side of the wheel, is the electric gyroscopic compass repeater. Down in dunnage, there's the main gyroscopic compass, and that repeater repeats the signal so he could read north, true north. And they would chart their course accordingly, depending on the readings on the compass. There's also a chart table where they would mark their courses. There would only be a few people up here at a time. There would be the wheelsman and one or two of the mates. You would also have a watchman. The captain himself wouldn't be up here unless it was heavy weather or they were pulling into port. So the bow thruster control is also up here. That's something that the captain would control himself, but everything else was up to the rest of the crew. They had radar. The Mather got radar in 1946, so they were one of the first ships on the Great Lakes to get radar. They had a radio direction finder. They had a searchlight. They had wind speed, wind direction, all sorts of different equipment that they needed.
Moving towards the aft end of the ship, we find the rest of the crew quarters and kitchen and dining areas.
They get progressively nicer the farther up in the rank. So here's the third engineer. He has a nice room. And then the other third engineer, also nice room. And then you have the second engineer who has an even better room. And he also has a window that opens up into the engine room. First engineer has a really nice room. Here's the chief engineer's quarters, and he has a double bed. He has a door that goes directly to a catwalk that leads to the engine room. So he had direct access to the engine room. This is the steward's quarters. So he was in charge of ordering food and making sure that all the meals were good. So he was the most important person on board as long as the captain wasn't nearby. This is the guest's dining room. This is where guests would eat, hence the name guest dining room. And they were right next to the officer's dining room. Interesting thing about the two dining rooms is that they were damaged in a fire in 1985. And so when the Mather became a museum, volunteers had to do a lot of restoration work in the dining rooms and in the galley, get rid of smoke damage and restore the wood. So at this point, you can't tell that there was ever a problem. So they did really, really good work. If you ate here, you had to be in uniform. And this is also where we have information about one of the feats of the Mather. In 1941, they were one of several ships that went north early to get iron for the war effort. Normally the season was May through December. They went up in April to get steel for England. And then they broke their record the next year in 1942 and got steel in March. They didn't have an icebreaker, so they had to follow a railway ferry that had an icebreaker at the front. I think it was a convoy of 13 ships going north early. So that's the officer's dining room. So this is the pantry where the second cook would do second cook stuff and make cakes and such. This fridge still works. So we store water bottles in there and soda pops. This is the galley. So this is where the head cook would prepare meals. It was updated a few times throughout the Mather's lifetime. So this is the 1970s, 1960s kind of look. But one thing that was pretty standard was the shelves having these brackets in them. So if the boat is listing, you're not going to get a shower of porcelain plates out of the ground. Same thing goes for the stove. The stove is electric, and it has braces on it as well, so the pots and pans don't slide off and splash scalding hot water everywhere. Also something that, you don't want. Another thing that we have here is the night kitchen. This is where unlicensed crew would eat. And if you had a shift in the middle of the night, you could come here and get sandwiches or snacks or something like that.
The Mather held its prestigious title as flagship until 1952, when the 767-foot freighter Edward B. Green displaced it. The Green is actually still sailing the lakes as Interlake Steamship Company's K.E. Barker. Instead of scrapping a ship that was just under 30 years old, Cleveland Cliffs opted to retrofit the Mather to make it more economical to better compete in the iron ore trade. Most of these improvements went into repowering its original 2,300 horsepower quadruple expansion steam engine with a 5,000 horsepower Delaval cross-compound steam turbine. A single oil-fired Babcock & Wilcox marine boiler took the place of its original coal-fired water tube boilers. The Mather also had a new streamlined stack casing, replacing its original one, a new electrical auxiliary system, replacing its steam one, and numerous changes to its aft deck houses.
This is the steering flat, so we have the original 1925 steering engine, never had a problem with it, never replaced it. And what's really cool about this room is that you can see evidence of the switchover from coal power to oil power. So on the floor, there are welded rivets right here, but then when you get closer to the refrigeration unit, you have round rivets. So the round rivets are from 1925, and the welded rivets are from 1954, when they ripped out the entire engine room to update the engine. What's really cool is the steering engine is still connected all the way to the front of the ship, so whenever someone in the front turns the wheel in the pilot house, there's a system of rods and gears that go all the way back to this little yellow wheel. Then that mechanical signal would go into the steering engine and then turn the rudder. Oh, yep, someone's turning the wheel in the pilot house. So that yellow wheel is called the indicator wheel. And if you were crazy, you could steer from back here. It would not be advisable, but if something was wrong with the steering linkage, you could conceivably steer from the indicator wheel. This was steam assisted, so there's those two white pipes that carried steam to help power the steering engine. So now we have the main engine. What we're standing on right now is a diesel tank, and the diesel was used to heat up the number 6 fuel oil. So on either side here, this is a 55,000 gallon tank of number 6 fuel oil, otherwise known as bunker C. Super thick tar-like oil, and that was used to power the dual turbine engine that was installed in 1954. So that's why this room is so open. Normally engine rooms are built to house the engine, and they're not this roomy, but the Mather was built with a much larger 4-story engine that would have gone all the way up to this catwalk. The catwalk was the chief engineer's catwalk, so he had a door in his bathroom or head, and he could just open that up and go on down and do whatever he needed to do in the engine room. The Mather's current engine allowed it to go 15 miles an hour. That was the top speed. The original engine, the top speed was about 12 miles an hour. But that 3 mile an hour difference makes a lot of difference because the faster your boat is going, the sooner it can deliver cargo, the more money it's going to make. Another cool thing about this room is that if something went horribly wrong and there was a fire that happened, this room would fill with carbon dioxide and you had 20 seconds to get out. And these rods right here on either side of this area, those go up to the boat deck, and there's valves, there's handles up there that would be used to close valves in the engine so that the fire wouldn't spread. This is the ship's computer. In 1964, the Mather got a Bailey logic cabinet, and this automated temperature and pressure inside the boiler. So the Mather became the first ship on the Great Lakes to be licensed to operate without a fireman. The fireman's job was to do exactly what this thing did. We have hand soldered circuit boards. 1960s era, it was top of the line at the time, but modern day solar calculators probably have more processing power. So here's the main control panels. There's the Bailey control panel for the logic cabinet. So there's always a human element. And then this is the main throttle and gauge panel for the ship itself. So when they got a message from the pilot house to change the speed or direction of the Mather, this is where they would adjust how fuel was being injected into the furnace in order to change how much energy they were getting into the engine. This is the main furnace, and there's 4 fuel injectors. There's a mirror inside that shows the underside of the boiler, which is really nice, but water would be in the boiler up above, and that would, of course, get boiled, hence the name boiler, and then get funneled into the engine to make the boat move. This is the optimistically named quiet room. So if you wanted to have a conversation without shouting, this is where you would go. And this is the diesel-powered electrical generator. They actually repaired this in the 90s when the boat became a museum because they wanted to power the museum under its own power. So they used this diesel generator. They sold the engine that powered the bow thruster in order to pay for the repair of this engine. So this, of all the stuff in the engine room, this might be able to run again. It's been out of service for a while, but it was repaired in the 90s, so it could be repaired again. Not likely, but potentially.
Despite no longer being the flagship of the fleet, it served Cleveland Cliffs reliably for another 16 years. On December 21, 1980, after finishing his 38th run of the season, the Mather went into winter layup at Toledo. It was unknowingly the last time it would ever sail under its own power. Unfortunately, because of Cleveland Cliffs losing their lucrative shipping contract with Republic Steel and an economic downturn, the company divested its shipping fleet. By 1985, all of their ships had been sold off except for the Mather. 2 years later, in 1987, the Cleveland Cliffs Board of Directors donated the ship to the Great Lakes Historical Society so it could be preserved as a floating museum. More than $1 million and thousands of volunteer hours were put into restoring the Mather. Originally, the ship was located off the East 9th Street Pier until 2005, when it was moved to its current location at North Coast Harbor. Today, the ship is owned by the Great Lakes Science Center and remains one of its most popular exhibits.
It's very unique. Most ship museums are either just the pilot house or they're rooms that were salvaged from the ship. The Mather is unique in that it's the entire ship that was kept intact and restored instead of just part of it. Another element is it's sort of a hidden gem, and so people who know about it are really, really passionate about it because it's something that's unique and personal to them.
If you enjoyed the video, please give this video a like and subscribe to Railroad Street for more content just like this. Thanks for watching.